Okay, welcome and good evening. Before I call the special meeting to order, I just want to make a point of clarification for the viewing public. We actually have three different meetings of the Board of Education happening tonight. We have a special meeting, followed by a work session, followed by an executive session. So I will now call the March 16th special meeting of the Lane Community College Board of Education to order. In order to continue conducting meetings in a manner that promotes safety and the well-being of our community, this meeting is being held remotely. I'd like to remind board members and staff to keep themselves muted and to use the hand raise feature when you'd like to speak. Please do not use the chat. That's reserved for tech communication. And board members are also asked to have their video turned on if they are able, so you're visible to the viewing public. Donna, could you take the roll call, please?
Sure. Holly Johnson.
Here.
Angela Van Kraus.
Present.
Mike Eister.
Here.
Austin Folnegi.
Present.
Steve Mattel.
Here.
Rosie Pryor.
Here.
Lisa Fragola.
Here. Great. So we're all present and accounted for. Thank you. The board will open the meeting with an acknowledgement of homeland, and that the meeting takes place on the traditional homeland of the Kalapuya. Tonight, Patrick Blaine, Dean of Curriculum Assessment and Grants Development, will read the acknowledgement of homeland for us. Welcome, Patrick.
Thank you and good evening. We began our meeting with the acknowledgement that the land we are on is the traditional homelands of the Kalapuya people. The Kalapuya were stewards of this very land for over 14,000 years before their traditional way of life was forever disrupted and destroyed. We start our meeting with humility and reverence for the original inhabitants, the Kalapuya. And as I was preparing to give the land acknowledgement over the last week or so, I had a good chance to go to our library. The college actually has a really extensive and wonderful set of resources on Native peoples of the Pacific Northwest, and specifically two nice volumes on the Kalapuya. And we also have a nice website about them linked. I would advocate, as we think about returning more and more of us to campus, that we remember the importance of place and this specific place, the role of the Kalapuya in it. Look for new ways to integrate public scholarship and even public learning opportunities, so that not just our students, but the visiting public can learn more and have a deeper historical and anthropological understanding of the Kalapuya and who they were. Thank you.
Thank you. So, okay, let's move on to our action item for our special meeting. Without objection, I'd like to adopt the agenda with flexibility. Is there any objection to adopting the agenda with flexibility? Okay, seeing none, we've adopted the agenda with flexibility. So it's with great excitement that I bring us to this special meeting action item. And just as a little introduction, even though we've been working with our consultant ACCT for about 8 months, it's nearly a year ago that we started this process. And I think the entire process and engagement of the community and our college stakeholders has been really remarkable. And I've learned even more about the college and met so many people through the process. And I did really appreciate all of the feedback I heard from people last week in particular about how much they also appreciated this president search process. And many people expressed their appreciation of the Board of Education for that. I also just wanted to clarify for the board, because we do have a lot going on tonight, that the nature of our vote in this special meeting is to offer the position of president to the person that the board has selected. We're not voting on the details of the contract at this time. But we will be discussing that in the executive session after, and I'll have an update and can answer any questions then. So I believe we have a motion, and we're going to go to Angela.
Thank you. I move the board hereby approve the hire of Dr. Stephanie Bolger to be the next president of Lane Community College, pending the negotiation and approval by the LCC Board of Education of an employment agreement by and between the college and Dr. Bolger.
Second.
And there's a second by Austin. So Angela, did you want to speak to your motion?
I'd love to, thank you. Sort of in a preface, I really want to also express my appreciation for the entire candidate pool. The folks that we interacted with were just truly incredible. The candidates we met were a diverse group of highly qualified individuals, each with a very impressive credentials, skills, and experience. But from the first interaction, I was particularly impressed with Dr. Bolger's calm competence and innovative ideas for approaching the variety of challenges and opportunities facing community colleges, specifically LCC. Our presidential profile reads like a description of Dr. Bolger. Her experience is vast, and I'm confident that she is ready to hit the ground running, building on the work that has already been done to continuously improve LCC in alignment with our strategic goals.
Thank you, Angela. Are there any other comments by board members? Austin?
Yeah, I just wanted to thank everyone who's a part of this process as well. Yeah, Dr. Bolger was a great from the application materials that she submitted to the Zoom meeting and then to the in-person meeting. And I think in the world that we live in today, there's a difference between a Zoom meeting interview and in-person interview. And she excelled in all of those, the interview and application process. I am really excited about this, this time period. It's a really exciting time period. And I look forward to working with Dr. Bolger as our future president of Lane Community College, and thank everyone who participated in the process. I especially want to thank those who submitted a community forum feedback. Having read every single one of them, I really appreciate hearing what the community wanted to say about all the candidates. So thank you, everyone.
Austin, is there anyone else? Holly?
Thank you, Chair Fragula. I'm just super excited to have been part of this process and thank everyone who was a part of the process. I think this is some exciting times for this community and specifically for Lane Community College, and glad that the community is in support of the future President Bolger, and just super excited to have been part of the process. I think we all did a great job, and I think that the community will be proud of our work. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? So I'll put myself in the queue. I just want to say I'm incredibly excited to be moving this process forward. I'm excited about Dr. Stephanie Bolger and the innovative ideas and solid experience that she'll be bringing. And I also want to thank this Board of Education for their commitment to a process that really engaged the community, really included our mission, vision, and values. I've also heard from other organizations locally who are conducting their own CEO or executive director searches, that they were really impressed and have asked for input on their own searches. So I think this has been an excellent process, and we have an excellent outcome. So I will go ahead and ask Donna to call the roll.
Okay. Holly Johnson,
Aye.
Angela Van Kraus,
Aye.
Mike Eister,
Aye.
Austin Fullnagy,
Aye.
Steve Mattel,
Aye.
Rosie Pryor,
Aye.
and Lisa Fragala.
Aye. That motion carries unanimously. Thank you. So forgot where I was. I'm so excited. I forgot where I was. Okay, so I will now close the March 16th special meeting of the Board of Education. And we'll go on to part 2. I now call the March 16th work session of the Lane Community College Board of Education meeting to order. We can let the record reflect that all board members are present and that the roll was called during the special meeting. Without objection, I'd like to adopt the work session agenda with flexibility. Is there any objection to adopting the work session agenda? Okay, seeing none, we've adopted the agenda with flexibility. Okay, before we begin our first agenda item, Board Member Fullnagy has asked for a point of privilege for a moment of silence for the people of Ukraine. And so before we start our meeting tonight, we will take a moment of silence to think about what is happening in Ukraine and the suffering of the people there. Thank you for that request, Austin. All right, our first discussion item tonight is tuition, banding, and budget. And so we have Provost Paul Jarrell and Zach Evans, AVP Zach Evans, with us for this introduction and then conversation.
Great, thank you. Good evening, Chair Fragala, members of the board. And I just wanted to thank you all for all your hard work on choosing our next president and your vision in doing so. I'm real excited to begin this transition, and certainly we are all ready to help out during the transition. And I really look forward to working with Dr. Balger for years to come. And I congratulate her on that. And I also would be remiss if I didn't thank President Hamilton. It's been a joy, March. Thank you. So this evening, we're going to continue a discussion that we had about a month ago at the February work session regarding tuition. As you all know, we are going to be bringing forward at the April board meeting, the business meeting on April 6th, a recommendation for tuition. As part of that recommendation, I suspect we will have a recommended amount for tuition, and then also structures and potential changes to the way we structure our tuition here. As we discussed previously, we did discuss one model, banded tuition, that is a model that could potentially incentivize students to take more credits. And we know that the more credits students take, the more likely they are to be successful, and certainly the sooner they are likely to complete their degrees. So we discussed some of the pluses and minuses of that. And in subsequent conversations, and I thank you all for the month we've had to really look at this, and subsequent conversations we've had on campus regarding tuition and tuition structures, and conversations and questions that you all have raised about potential changes to the structure, in particular banded, it did uncover some potential unintended consequences, and I want to talk a little bit about those today. And it also led to a potentially different approach to structuring tuition that would also work to incentivize students to be full-time and take more credits, but do so with recognizing that some of our students can't necessarily do that, and without necessarily penalizing them for their inability to do so. as a result of that. So the conversations really helped out in this, and I think that at the end of the day, when we ultimately make a recommendation and you take action on something, we will have a model that was much more well thought out from the student's point of view. And so I really appreciate the time to do that. I'm going to share my screen. I have uploaded for you, this was changing, seemed like daily over the last few days. And I did provide for you all an update in your, let me make sure I get the right one. Yeah, sorry. Provide you an updated on the tuition presentation. Can you all see that now? I think so, yeah. All right, so I'll move through this relatively quickly because I want you all to have time for discussion. And my partner in crime for the evening, Zach Evans, we want to save some time for him also, is going to be discussing some budget updates and implications there as well. So we want to take care of all of that. So basically what I have in this updated packet for you really, I give some examples of resident tuition, non-resident tuition, international tuition. I want to focus mostly on the resident scenario. I don't see a lot of changes coming necessarily with the non-resident and the international program as far as their structures are concerned. So I want to show you three scenarios: a per credit scenario, a banded scenario. Per credit is the scenario that we currently have. It's just a flat per credit rate, regardless of how many credits a student takes. They pay the same rate per additional credit. Banded, which we spent a good bit of time talking about last month. And then this new model, which we'll just call a tuition cap, which I think blends the two of these together in a way that allows us to experiment maybe with a different model, but mitigates potential risk to students and unintended consequences to students. And then I also have in here two different scenarios for each one of these. One that shows what this would look like with our current tuition structure, current tuition rates, and another one that shows an increase. And I have to say that, preface this, and Zach may talk a bit about this a little bit later, is that in discussions with lost revenue that we've been seeing, added expenses that we've been seeing, we have put together a budget that came through the governance structures that does have a modest tuition increase in it. And so these increases, so the B scenario for each one of these shows what that tuition structure and amount would be with that proposed increase that is making its way through our governance systems. We had a forum on that today, as a matter of fact, campus forum regarding that. So if I can jump in with the first one, so we'll just focus on the per credit rates. This is our classic scenario here on per credit. It's status quo. Our current tuition rates are at $126 per credit. What has made its way through the governance structures is a proposed balanced budget that does have some increased revenue from tuition. And in order to achieve that increased revenue that we feel we need without jeopardizing student services and the experiences that we provide to students, we feel that we need about a 5% tuition increase. That would amount to roughly about $1 million in additional revenue. And I'll show you how we can package things to still achieve roughly that $1 million. So that's kind of our mark we're looking for these additional ones. And so a 5% increase would be roughly a $6.50 increase to tuition to $132.50 per credit. So this is our current structure. I only went up to 16 credits. We have students that take up to 20 credits or more, but very few take over 17 or 18. So I just stopped this at 16 just in the interest of space. But you can see this is just $126 for each additional credit, so that if a student was full-time for financial aid purposes, you can see there the current tuition would be $1,512 for their current tuition, right? And then of course it goes up or down depending upon whether credits go up or down. Here is what that same model, that per credit model, looks like with the 5% increase. It's $132.50 per credit there. And you can see again how that changes, again, just additional, just multiplicative depending upon how many credits a student takes. And you can see that at 12, the increase would be to $1,590. So again, to compare that to there, $1,512 under our current structure, another $78 to $1,590 here to be full-time. I will tell you just for reference, it depends on what year you look at and what term you look at, but roughly half of our students take 12 credits or less, and take less than 12 credits, and roughly half of them take 12 credits or more. And again, that varies. It could be 40-60 or 60-40, depending upon the particular year or term. The most common credit load that we look at is 12. More students take 12 credits than any other credit number that we have here. It's about 25% of all of our students take 12 credits. And that's because 12 credits is linked to maximum financial aid awards. It's not full-time by completion standards, but by financial aid standards, it would be full-time. So that's what we would look at there. If we were going to maintain our current tuition structure, obviously status quo is with the 126. If we are going to try to achieve that additional revenue from tuition that we've indicated we think is necessary, it would put that tuition to $132.50. That's about the 5% increase, okay? The other model that we discussed last week, and we spent a good bit of time talking about, and there clearly are some benefits to this, but I also want to talk a little bit about what might be some unintended consequences in hindsight, having had the month to engage in some dialogue with some stakeholders around this. So scenario 2, we'll call that the banded model. I'll show you again a 2A and a 2B. 2A is with the current structure. 2B is again with that average, I'm going to say average 5% increase, because it really depends on how many credits a student takes, whether they see an increase, a decrease, or remain the same. Here is what the current structure would look like if banded, right, based upon the 126 per credit model there. So you can see that we would band there, and the 1 to 5 is less than half time. The 6 to 8 is half time as far as financial aid is concerned. The 9 to 11 is 75% time, and the 12 plus is full time for financial aid awards. That's why those breaks are there where they are, why the boundaries are where they are. For the most part, in the lower bands, that band price is set roughly at the midpoint, the exception being the 12 to 16, where it's priced at about 13.5 credits, which is a little bit less than midpoint. And I'll talk in a minute about why we did that. This is what the impact to the student would be. Again, this is from our last, it's a slight modification, but it's real similar to the last one we talked about a month ago with regard to banded tuition. You can see that the rate per credit varies depending upon how many credits a student's taking. The take-home message from this one is that within a band, if a student lands at the lower end of that band, they have a disproportionate increase in their tuition. If they land midpoint, it's roughly the same as it would be if it was per credit. And if they land at the upper end of that band, they see a reduction in tuition. And that's true in all of these bands. So you can see that if a person was taking 12 credits here, the impact to that student would be that they would be paying disproportionately more per credit they're taking than someone that might be taking 15 or 16 credits within that band. Again, because it's a fixed price. Now, typically, and if we were to do this just with tuition rates the same as they are, it would generate roughly about $65,000 additional revenue. And that's because, and this is the unintended consequence that came a little bit more clear as we discussed this further, that's because that we have disproportionately more students that tend to, right now, if we look at current credit taking behavior, are at that lower end of the band, right? So the fear with this one, and I'll just be perfectly transparent and clear, the fear with this one is that while it has been shown to really influence credit taking behavior, most of the data are from four-year institutions where this exists, right? And I think it's fair to say that there's a greater proportion of students that are capable of taking full-time loads or more credits at a four-year institution than at a community college. Again, half of our students are part-time roughly. So we wouldn't want to necessarily engage in a model that could have some unintended consequences of disproportionately impacting students that are part-time and can't take additional credits. Again, that's the population we want to try to help the most, right? And why community colleges exist. So, I think that could be a potential unintended consequences. We don't really know what student behavior would be. If student behavior was that they would take more credits, which we would encourage them to do and educate them to do, we could see some huge benefits to this. But it's not clear, it's a risk, right? I think that is the risk with adopting this banded model, is that we don't know how our students would react. So it might be nice to be able to have a better understanding of that before we were to jump full force in here, which is why we have presented a third model that I'll discuss in one second. Here is that same banded model, but just with that roughly 5% increase. It actually ends up being a little bit less than that in this case as an average increase. But again, this would generate, if we were to adopt this with this structure, it would generate the revenue we think we need to get. The risk is that we might disproportionately impact negatively our part-time students, because some of them just might not be able to take advantage of this banded model. It would generate, and here's how you can see the impact would be per credit. And again, this is real similar to a chart that I showed you last month. So it would generate that additional revenue, but it would impact those students. And the reason, a really good banded model that would be beneficial to part-time students would have that credit amount or that band amount priced at the lowest credit within the band, the lowest number of credits within the band. We simply can't do that because that would impact our revenue too much. Even with an increase of 5% to tuition per credit, if we priced it at the lower band with the current credit taking behavior at the lowest credit within that band, we would actually lose money relative to what we're currently bringing in, even with an increase. So it's not something that at this point, fiscally, I think the college could really engage in to make it be as student-centric as we could. So that's why when we started having conversations on campus with lots of folks and answering some of the questions that you all posed to us after the last presentation, that led us to, well, is there an in-between that allows us to try to incentivize students to take full-time credits, 15, but in a way that recognizes and doesn't potentially negatively impact our students that are part-time or have to be part-time or can only take 12 credits. So the model really is a blend between the two that I've just shown you. This is a new one that we haven't talked about. Here's what it would look like with current rates, right, of a 126 per credit. You see, we would keep the per credit model up to 12, and then we would price a per credit model, the 13 plus, we would price that maximum amount. You pay $1,770 and you can take all the credits you want, 13 and over. We have very few students, like I said, we probably have less than 100 students that take 17 or more credits. It's really, most of our students take 15 to 16 if they're going to get up in that range. So that would still be, that would create a significant advantage for those students that would be take one more class from 12, that puts you at about 16 credits. You're getting a bargain for that. You're in essence getting that last course that you add at about half price with this particular model. We couldn't really necessarily implement this without taking a fiscal hit with current tuition rates. You see, if credit taking behavior remained exactly the same, we would probably see lost revenue of about $250,000 a year. And that's because those students that are taking the higher number of credits are paying less for them than they're paying now. So we would see that hit for that. Here's the same model, which is at again, per credit up to 12. This is at $132.50. That's that 5% increase. And then we cap 13 plus at $1,875. You can take 13 credits or 20 credits, and you pay the same price. And again, the real price break there comes when that student hits 14, 15, 16, 17 credits. They're actually getting those credits at rates that would be comparable to current. And the benefit of this, right, is that it does allow us to incentivize that full-time status for credit taking 15. It's in line with conversations we've had about 15 to finish before, and a way that we could implement something similar to that there. But it doesn't impact the part-time student any more than simply just the per credit rate increase. So it's the least risk, but allows us the ability to try to leverage this model to incentivize more credit taking behavior from our students. There is a slight loss in revenue relative to if we were going to do just per credit. Again, simply because we're discounting those higher credits there. But again, would bring in roughly that million or so that we think. And again, these projected estimates are really projections. They're based upon current fall term, just this past fall term enrollments, and not assuming any kind of movement of students. And again, because that's really hard to predict, and that's something we want to have a better idea of, I think, and where some concern was around this. So those are the three models for residents, and I'll entertain some questions about that if you have them, and then Zach can present, and then we can have questions, whatever suits you well. I have included in your presentation a non-resident as well, and this is what that would look like in terms of having, again, that 5% increase added to it. Non-resident students are students that are not border state students. Border state students pay in-state fees. Online courses, we charge student in-state fees as well. So this really is a very few number of students that this impacts. And with our residency policy, a student can become a resident if they choose to after their first term. So a student's really only a non-resident if they come in the fall for fall term, and then in winter they're a resident, and then they would fall into that resident rate, the resident package that we talked about. International is exactly the same that we have currently in terms of structure, but it does have a 5% increase on that, again, which is what we've kind of mapped that we feel we would need to be able to meet the budget goals that are in the balanced budget that's making its way through governance. So that is what I have for just kind of an introduction. Didn't want to spend a lot of time on that. My apologies if I went a little bit too long, but I wanted you to see all three kind of a little bit, at least from my perspective, some pluses and minuses for each, and then have some time for a little dialogue if you have them. Again, we're not asking for action tonight. We will bring something to you at the board meeting in April.
Hey, are there questions, comments from board members? Austin.
Just quickly, obviously no action tonight, but are you wanting a little bit of guidance as far as which ones we as individual board members prefer, or?
Yeah, thank you, Austin. That's certainly helpful if we have some sense of direction from the board coming out today. That helps us a couple different ways. If there are additional questions, we can certainly address them and bring them to you with a recommendation at the next meeting. It also gives us a little bit of indication, okay, some of these require a little bit more legwork on our part from a technology point of view to implement. So the sooner we kind of have a direction of which kind of model we might be leaning to, that certainly helps us also.
Absolutely. And I have some research that I need to do and have some questions later on.
Certainly.
But I do like the graded model and the capping out with the 17 credits and so forth. I really think this is a good direction to go towards. And but I'll have more questions, of course, as we get closer to an actual action. So thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Austin.
Steve?
Well, first off, Paul and those who worked with you on this, thank you so much. When the banded model was introduced last time around, I was one of those folks who was feeling some pain, like really worried about those students who, wouldn't be able to take advantage, as you said. And so I'm just very, very appreciative of the out of the box thinking in response to concerns that some of us expressed. I'll just, I don't have many questions. I feel like I understand it really well. You presented it really clearly. I'm mostly here to just say that I, strongly support 3B, right? So that's the new option with plus 5% to come out of the discussions, right? So no penalties to those who, for any reason whatsoever, can only, are going to take 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 up to 12, but some incentive for those who can go a little bit past that. That's my favorite and the one I'm going to strongly support.
Thank you, Steve. And yeah, it was really a group effort. I know Zach and I put a lot of time into working on this, but there were many others. So it was a group effort, and the dialogue with questions from the board members and also college council was really informative in kind of ferreting out what some of those unintended consequences may be, so that we could address them in a way and do the best we can to mitigate that impact.
I have myself in the queue. I will keep an eye out for anyone else who wants to comment or question. I just was curious because on the kind of title page for section 3, it says a 4% increase there. Some of the other pages have the percentage increase at the top. So 3B, cap with increase, that's a 5%. I believe you said that's a 5% increase on average.
Yeah, the average actually is about 4%. If you look at it across the board, it's a little bit more than 4% increase overall, like over all credits. But for part-time students, it would be that translates to a 5% increase, that 132.50.
Thank you for that clarification. So I also wanted to echo all of the efforts that have been put into presenting this to us, making it really clear, answering our questions, our concerns. I feel like there's been really a great effort made on this. I do think it's really important that we do make a decision on this soon. I think it's critical in order to support the budget, the BDS, the Budget Development Subcommittee, to move forward and do the important work that they need to do on developing the budget. I really appreciated your comment, Paul, about the importance of student services. And I know, and I think we understand more and more how critical those are to student success. And so I appreciate the creativity and working to not impact those services. I am supportive of the CAP model that you are suggesting. I'm supportive of the banding approach, and I'm supportive of the increase. And we'll also be listening to my colleagues and what their thinking is, and looking forward to taking an action at our next board meeting. And I see, I'm going to go to the first round of people who haven't had a chance yet, and then I'll go to a second round. I have Mike and then Angela.
So you may have said this, Paul, but if you did, I missed it or forgot it. Have we done any market testing or focus groups with students to see what they're like, what they're drawn to, if and what appeals to them?
We haven't in general, and we did have a student forum. We had, there was not large attendance. Mindy might know the exact numbers, but I think it was, in the dozen or more, maybe 2 dozen at the most. Attendance in general, and this is not only true just this year, but in the past, students support modest increases in tuition. They understand that without that, they do tend to have some kind of reduction in services or not the same experience. So they understand that kind of need to keep up with inflation. The banded model has been very popular with our international population. I would see it ultimately, I think down the road, if we did the CAP model and we saw good experiences with that and students changed behaviors, well then, hey, let's try something else. So again, right, to even incentivize it even more. But it's least risky, I think, to not jump in, right off the bat with it without knowing what their behaviors might be. We haven't done any kind of surveying, but this would afford us some time, I think, unless we're adopting the banded model, to survey students about how they feel their behaviors might change. We haven't done that yet, but we certainly could add that. We have some student surveys going out later this year, so we certainly could add something like that to get a little bit better sense of how they might feel about that.
I have Angela and then Rosie.
Thank you. And thank you for all the work you've done on this. Paul, I know I'm a vocal critic of increasing tuition, but I also understand that you're up against it and you're working really hard and coming up with creative solutions. I really appreciate that. At the same time as I continue to be very critical of increasing tuition. So I'm curious about with this, suppose we were to move to a CAP model, what sort of flexibility, like how nimble is this? If we see that we've got, so I think I have a subset of student counts here because I'm counting something like 24% of students could be in this CAP level, and so regardless of what the actual number is, supposing it increases or decreases sort of more than we would expect, and we find that our revenues become sort of unstable as a result, how quickly can we sort of adjust or change how we're structuring tuition if we feel that it's necessary?
Yeah, I mean, we aren't the most nimble. I'll tell you why. It's because we would have to make the board would have to vote a change. We would have to implement a change upstream from when students start to register for something, right? So it would really depend on when we would notice that. I think what would happen is that we most likely are buying into something for a year. We could change mid-year, but again, where we are in that cycle with registration, it makes it hard to predict. But we can certainly change next year. So I think that would be the impact. I really think, like I said, with the status quo per credit, there's really no risk. We're just continuing what we're doing. With the banded, there's more risk. With the CAP, there's less risk for the student, right? So I really think with the CAP, the likelihood of us seeing students drop down from that to 12, where we would see it negatively impacted, I think that is really rare. I think what we could see is a lot of those students that are at 12, again, the most common number we have, if we could get a bunch of those to take one more class, we've actually made a little bit more revenue, and that would help us also. Again, because even with the balanced budget, as you'll see that Zach brings forward, if he's going to chat about it at all today, I don't know, but we are still looking at having to make some pretty hard cuts to materials and services that we provide to students. So I think that anything would help us if we do get a little bit more revenue. I really don't anticipate a lot of movement. But if we do, I think it's up from 12 into that upper band. And so that's just better for us and better for students.
Rosie?
I want to add my thanks to that of others who express their appreciation for the creativity and the innovative thinking. I've been really interested in the opportunity to experiment with pricing as part of the marketing mix that we use to build enrollment for years now. And so I'm really, really grateful to see this, and I really laud the effort. To me, it feels like the question is whether to initiate these new pricing strategies with a tuition increase or not. And I want to share with the board how I look at that. First of all, what concerns me the most is this is not a data-driven decision. As Dr. Gerald just pointed out, we don't know, we don't have the data to verify whether tuition is a fundamental obstacle. And as a result, we don't have the data to verify that it's not. We just don't know. We know there are obstacles. We know there are reasons why fully half of our students go part-time and may or may not be in a position to change that. But given the downward trend that we've experienced in enrollment over the last 4 years alone, I think we have to be concerned about the impact that continued tuition increases have, the obstacle that they represent. We also know that less than half of our students receive tuition assistance. So when we say, oh, well, tuition increase will be accounted for by tuition assistance, what we know is that fully over half of our students won't have that mitigating assistance. So it will be a direct impact to over half of Lane's current students. And finally, the biggest concern I have and have had for maybe all of the years I've been on the board, to be honest with you, is that tuition increases have become a crutch, a budgetary crutch at LCC. Raising tuition at Lane is not like raising rates at the local utility, where people pretty much have to just accept them. People have a choice whether to come to Lane or not come to Lane. And we have reached a point in our history, I believe, where we're not contemplating an increase because we have exciting new benefits to bring forward to students. I haven't heard of one new thing students would get in return for paying even higher tuition than they're currently paying today. We're contemplating raising tuition because the cost of operating LCC has exceeded its resource base. We need the money, and we prefer not to have to grapple with that fundamental structural budgetary problem. And for me, that's kicking the can down the road.
Austin, followed by Steve.
And also I think we're trying to avoid divesting in our institution as well in regards to what Rosie was saying there. My question though, there's opportunities. Well, actually, how much of an opportunity do we have to maybe survey students and reach out to the student population? You mentioned about a student being a part of one of the committees that this went through. But is there an opportunity for surveying students? And my other question is, out of the student population that does 12 or more credits, or 12 credits, and there's a possibility of them going from 12 to 15, do you find that there's like a cluster of them in different departments, different degree programs and so forth, or is it just kind of spread out through this? And I wanted to correct myself. I said braided earlier. I meant banded model. Braided is a different model at a different institution. But anyway, those two questions in regards to, is there time to reach out to students, and is there any clusters of where we would probably see a 12 to 15 credit increase?
We have. Thank you, Austin. We have reached out to students regarding both an increase and a potential model structure, as I mentioned before, through a student forum. We have not surveyed students via a survey about, mailed out or through email or whatever. We can do that. I doubt we would have the responses back in time and significant enough input by April 6th is a problem, which is really our drop dead date for, well, not drop dead. It's the date we need a board action in order to be able to implement any changes for summer term, which is the start of the next fiscal year. But we can continue to engage with students regarding this, but the engagement that we've had in the past, like I said, some students think that there's some benefits to a banded or a cap model. They can see the benefit of that. They understand the need for small increases to keep up with inflation and things like that in general over the years, but we can certainly do some more targeted surveys of students, again, wouldn't have any additional results back for you by April 6th. With regard to your second question, I don't really know the answer to that, but I'll comment on it this way. If I had to make a guess based upon my experience in working with students and understanding how credits sit and degree plans sit, I would see that a lot of our students, that are probably about half of our students on the transfer side of the house, would be the ones that would more likely pick up a class, right? An extra class. And the reason I say that is because on the CTE side of the house, most of those programs are already pretty prescriptive in terms of what they must take to be able to complete. And so they tend to be taking 12 to 15 credits or more already every term, right? So I don't know that we would see a lot of behavior changes there. We do have some CTE students, certainly, that do complete their credentials part-time, and this might incentivize some of them to try to do it full-time, and along with, outreach, outreach from us and providing as much support as we can for their increased credit loads and things like that. I think that there is the potential for some of them to move, but I think we would see more movement probably in what you would consider a traditional aged transfer student. Just their life's a little bit more simple. Their the courses they have to take to transfer are a little bit less prescriptive, so there are more choices for them that way, that they could probably piece something together.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yeah, you're quite welcome.
Go ahead, Steve.
All righty, well, thank you. I just wanted to respond to some of the comments I heard from some of my fellow board members, and then also ask Paul a question. So giving you a little fair warning there, Paul. So of course it goes without saying, right? Who wants to raise tuition on students? Nobody. So that goes without saying, but the reason why I'm supportive of the capped approach on, with B, therefore 5%, give or take whatever average increase, is what I see across the board on the, the budget initiative. We have an $8 million gap and we have to fill it. And what I understand from discussions with Paul and Marge and others is that, we're not just loading it all on tuition increases. We are making significant cuts to the material budget. We are making, I think, cuts to the staffing budget as well. And we'll hear more about that, I suppose, from Zach. So everybody, all sort of sides or whatever of the equation, are being asked to sacrifice or make. So that's compelling for me. The other thing that Paul said in my one-on-one with him or with Marge and him a couple of days back was that right now our classes are operating on average at 75% capacity. And so that means that if we're able to incentivize students to take that additional class through the capped model, so they're at 12 credits and they take one more because it's relatively inexpensive to take an additional credit, that would likely not increase the cost to instruct, because the capacity is there to absorb all those additional credits that students would take. That was compelling for me. So that's a place where we can make up some revenue without increasing expenses, because we're operating only at 75%. And then just to remind ourselves that we ourselves as a board voted for, I forget precisely what it was, but a 3%-ish increase to the EA union just this past fall. So we have put ourselves in a situation where we have to respond with some kind of an increase or cut or whatever it is somewhere to make up that gap. Now that's 3%, and Paul's asking us for 5%. The other thing, of course, is that, as we are told all the time, the overall budget is sort of something like 80% people. And the thing that drives the people budget more than anything at a public institution is the benefits, right? So healthcare and PERS costs go up, and we have to pay those. Those things are often, beyond our ability to manage directly. And as Rosie says, you don't get more for that. The student doesn't get more for that, but it's a thing that, I feel like we haven't limited options. So those are some of the reasons why I am supporting the 5% increase, because I do feel like we're doing the best we can. We're in a very difficult situation. And I think it's reasonable to ask everybody to take their fair share. Paul, so I said I was going to ask a question. I value your opinion very highly. I know you've thought about this a lot. Our students, and I know how that you have the ability to be very diplomatic. So with having said all of that, do you have a gut feel for one of these that you think might go over better and help us achieve our goals and mitigate risk and, go over well with students?
Yeah, thank you, and thanks for the vote of confidence in my opinion. I'm going to take this twofold, right? So I'm going to preface this by saying it pains me to ask students to pay for any tuition. It pains me to ask for an increase. Public education ought to be free, should be a right, not a privilege. I believe that with all of my being, and that's why I've been in this career I'm in for a better part of 30 years. So I don't make any recommendation lightly, because I know the impact an education can make, the impact it's made on me and my family, and the impact it's made on the students that I've been fortunate to work with over the last 30 years or more. So I feel an increase is needed. I think that the increase that we're asking for is reasonable in the sense of an increase, and doesn't have the students bearing a disproportionate burden of that deficit. I don't disagree with Rosie that we also don't want to kick the can down the road. We know we have some hard choices to make. And you'll see as we get further down the budget development process, we are going to have to make some really painful choices and decisions down the road, because we are going to have to do some personnel cuts, some cuts to materials and services, and other things that people will feel. But we're going to do it in a way, hopefully, that minimizes that impact to students. And I feel if we don't get some kind of marginal tuition increase in the neighborhood of 5%, we'll have to make cuts deeper that will have a more significant impact on students than the 5% tuition raise would. I just believe that, As far as a model, me, a month ago, if you'd asked me that question a month ago, Steve, I'd have said you're a fool if you don't say banded tuition. But having had the benefit of that month and talking with folks like you and people forcing me and others to kind of look at what those unintended consequences may be, it's a little bit too risky for me right now. And the reason I say that is because we do have a lot of students that are part-time. It would break my heart if at the end of the day I pushed for something and it negatively impacted them in ways. That's counter to everything that I've been advocating for, right? So I have a hard time with that. I would have a hard time recommending that one right now. Doesn't mean I couldn't get there, but I would need to do a little more homework, and a little more homework with our students to feel like I'm not going to be inadvertently affecting students that I don't have to. I like the CAP model, honestly. I think it's a way to dip our toe in that banded structure. It allows us to market that be full-time and save money kind of thing to students and really incentivize them to try to get to 15. Gives us time to look at, can we change student behavior? And if the answer to that's yes, then let's go to the next step from that, which would be pushing some of those bands and caps maybe further down a little bit. And if we can get to a point, to Rosie's point, where we're fiscally a little bit more stable, maybe we can be even more creative and do what really would be best for the students and price things even cheaper within a band or whatever. We just aren't at a point where we can do that right now. So, and that's a long-winded answer to, I would recommend 3B at this point if I had to make a recommendation, because it does give us the modest increase I feel we need, and it allows us the opportunity to maybe incentivize some credit-taking behavior changes in students. So thank you for the opportunity to say that, Steve.
Thank you. And I wished I had your diplomatic skill with words. I would be so much further along in my life. Thank you, Paul.
You're quite welcome.
Oops, sorry, I meant to take that down.
Rosie, and then perhaps we can move on to a budget update from Zach.
By all means, I am interested, and I would be grateful if I could persuade my colleagues on this board to support finding a way to reach out to the students who aren't here. I'm all for doing all we can to protect the interests of existing students and being careful about how we use pricing as a marketing strategy with the 7,800 FTE that remain from the 13,000 we had just 4 years ago. we're in a completely different time in history. We're in some inflection point for community colleges. And I recognize that Lane is not unique. I mean, the traditional economy tanks, enrollment soars paradigm is no longer happening. And our enrollment tanked along with the economy and the pandemic and everything else. So I actually am slightly less interested in talking to the students who hung in there than I am in talking to individuals who would be coming but for, fill in the blank. And a really smart market research organization could help us understand that. Maybe it's research we can't afford to do on our own. Maybe we could persuade some of our partners at the other 16 colleges in Oregon to partner with us on some undertaking like that. Maybe we could persuade OCCA to help us with research like that. I don't know. All I know is we don't have good information about why they're not coming back. Because in our history, we've been through these cycles before, and enrollment has overwhelmed us. Almost almost the opposite of the pandemic. I mean, it just overwhelmed the college. We couldn't hire part-time faculty fast enough to offer sections to meet the demand. That's just not happening to us anymore. And we need to understand why, or we can't make good choices. So I wish we could carve off some resources of our own, or persuade our partners to work with us, or get OCCA to work with us, or ACCT. We need better information than we have.
Marge?
So we have that research, Rosie, and we didn't have to, we can do it, but it's nationally been done. The HOPE study went out last year, but more importantly, AACC has been doing this for years. And they do say that financials is at the top, but it isn't always just tuition. And I wrote myself some notes here, because a quick search, it's all, I mean, it's totally there for the public to look at, but it's housing. It's the high cost of housing. And Eugene, unfortunately, that's so real here. So finding to pay for your housing, your food, childcare, and you've brought this to our attention. You know, what can we do more? And we'll be bringing you a proposal to expand childcare, but to lower that cost of childcare, make it accessible. Finding transportation, loss of a job. So when people say, when they survey students, finance is a very big bucket. Tuition's one piece of it, I agree. But on top of that, these life financial issues are horrendous. And I think the pandemic really kicked our students hard, very, very hard right now. So one of the things what can we do though? We can keep the textbook costs down. We know, again, there's research on that. What are these other things you can do? We can have free online course materials. Having the online program, it really relieves them with transportation and childcare if we offer online. So the good news is, the bad news was the pandemic happened. The good news was we learned how to do it much better with the pandemic. So doing online. So I think the national literature is out there. The HOPE study was local, it was Oregon, and it basically keeps repeating. So yes.
Can you bring that forward to the board, please?
Oh my goodness, yes. We'd be happy to start sending you some articles. Yes.
Great. Thank you. Okay, so great conversation. Thank you, everyone. I'm going to turn it over to Zach. Are you still here? Yep, there you are. Great. Thanks, Zach.
I am still here. I'm feeling like Beetlejuice over here.
You're really blending into your background too.
I noticed that it's the glare and the blue on blue. Paul and I flipped a coin, and he won, so he got to go first. And he left me with about 12 minutes. So I'll see what I can.
Well, we can always be generous.
Praise Zach.
So I am sharing the budget update. So let me know if you cannot see it. Okay. So a few updates since the last time that we talked. The Budget Development Subcommittee hosted a campus forum today. with around 60 to 70 attendees. And that group shared their balancing framework, their consensus balancing framework with College Council last week, which also was approved with consensus. Another kind of high level thing, the budget committee meetings are coming up. We're starting May 4th and have tentative placeholders for the following Wednesdays through the month of May. So starting on the 4th and potentially ending on the 25th if we don't finish sooner. As I mentioned before, the college did not request an extension of our higher education emergency relief funds. However, the Department of Education generously extended everybody's awards until June 30th of 2023. That happened last Wednesday afternoon, and we are still tracking kind of the impact of that. I will say though, at this time, our plans to fully expend the awards within the original period of performance has not changed. And then at an April meeting, taking that into consideration, April or May board meeting, I'm going to be bringing a resolution to establish a COVID stabilization reserve. And as part of the strategy of using all of the higher education emergency relief funds now, and then setting up a stabilization reserve as we know that the pandemic is continuing and it's waning at the moment, but potential for something else. And we want to be prepared to mitigate the financial impacts of that. So what I'm showing here, the standard format, the column on the left is our actuals for our operating funds 1 and 9 for 2021. So last fiscal year. Column in the middle is this fiscal year, and the column on my right-hand side, or the salmon color, is next year. So with this, I'm going to come down to the bottom. The FY22 this year, with the application of lost revenue through the emergency relief funds is looking good. Similar kind of what we had last year. By applying those funds, we're seeing a surplus last year, forecasting a surplus for this year. And then with the absence of that funding, those one-time funds in its entirety, still showing a deficit for next year. There has been improvement from when I showed this in February, tightening up the projection and being able to, I would say, as my predecessor would say, we sharpened our pencils in the budget office. I will note, we've been a lot of conversations about pension obligation bonds and when to go out for bonds and what the impact with that would be, and having reserves established to mitigate fluctuations in the market. So we have planned to use the PERS reserve this year at $860,000, and I've been showing the beginning balance for the year and the potential ending balance for the year. Given the discussions to sell PERS bonds and the significance of having healthy reserves to mitigate any changes, market fluctuations, the college has the opportunity to withhold a portion or in entirety that transfer this year. There is a way to preserve the reserve for this year. My recommendation would be wait until late June, when nearly all of the fiscal year activity is settled, with the exception of audit activity, and then having more clear direction on where we are in the pension bond selling process, and then having Dr. Stolliard and Greg Holmes get together to make that decision. Next year, the plan does assume use of the PERS reserve, and it's for a planning purpose. Using the reserve has caused our OPE rates to drop 1% percentage point on the contracted rates. This year's contracted rates are 67%. We are setting next year at 66. So we're realizing the savings on our contracted OPE rates by using the reserve. My recommendation for next year would be plan to use the reserve, see how the sale of the pension obligation bond is going. And if we're seeing savings throughout the year, offset the usage of the reserve by the savings realized by selling the bonds.
That it?
Oh, no, Mike has his hand up. So
Yep, I
paused.
see Mike's got his hand up. Okay, so we'll go to Mike and then whatever else you would like to share. Mike?
I was just going to weigh in, but I'll wait until Zach finishes his presentation.
I will, in essence of time, go a little faster. The next page, this is our standard, we've been showing this, our ending fund balance policy, and it ties into our going to be recommendation to establish a COVID stabilization reserve. We started the fiscal year in July 1 with $7.9 million in our general fund ending fund balance, which was 9.1% of our policy requirement. The current projection estimates a almost $2 million surplus for the general fund. Bringing these two together, now there's still some factors that could impact this between March 16th and June 30th. But assuming all is equal, we would be landing around 12% of our policy requirement, which is above and beyond the 10 and also above and beyond the trigger of 11% per policy. Wanted to mention that. Next page, we've talked about levers a lot. I need to move this down. So what I've done now is the next 2 pages, this is budget planning scenario A. I have matched this to scenario 2A in Paul's updated presentation, which was current tuition rate, banded tuition. So using the structure of $126 current rate and then the bands. What I have done then on the next page is I've outlined the detail that goes into these dollar figures. So I will explain, I'll go through one of them and then I'll highlight the differences between the other scenarios. So state funding, with the passage of Future Ready Oregon and investment in the Career Pathways program, there's $15 million that is set aside from the state for that. And the college is guaranteed $300,000. All 17 community colleges will receive $300,000. They're then going to run the remaining amount, the balance that remains after that, through the Community College Support Fund, which we're right now getting around 8.2%. So with the funding coming through from Future Ready Oregon and a small amount of money that's coming through the Oregon President's Council for Cybersecurity, we're anticipating a $1.1 million addition in state funding for next year. Tuition, a little piece from Paul's version there, but more targeted growth in our continuing education, our aviation academy, and our international program. After thorough debate and some presentation by Dr. Plott, I'm looking how potential 2% enrollment change for the better next year from where we currently are. A tech fee request to increase our tech fee $4 per credit from its current $11 per credit is in this framework. The COVID reserve in is what I mentioned earlier, creating a stabilization reserve. So those would be our resources revenue changes. And then we get to the expenditure part. So with a no tuition change, we'd be looking at rounding $1.8 million of personnel reductions. And that figure includes OPE. And then noting that And we'll get to the next slide. So a significant personnel reduction, a significant materials and services reduction, and funding major maintenance at $700,000 from operations. I have then added more information on this page, kind of explaining more how all of those dollars break down to bring us to zero, starting with the planning projection, running down through, etc. Moving to scenario B, which is the College Council approved framework. The major changes on this one is the tuition line, roughly that 5% at that $1.1 million. The previous scenario had 65,000 credit tuition change for resident students, 1.1 million. The big factors here that toggle, the COVID reserve, instead of being 1.5 million, 1.25, and a significant change in contracted personnel reductions. This will still have an impact. I'm not minimizing the impact, but it's not as significant as the rounding 1.8 million on the previous slide. A more manageable M&S reduction and still funding major maintenance at $700,000. I have then repeated the same task of adding more detail into what makes up the buckets on the previous page. Scenario C, this one aligns with scenario 3B, or the CAP model that was discussed. Still keeping the state parameter, state funding change constant, the enrollment change constant. The changes to this one is instead of 1.1 million estimated or anticipated additional tuition revenue, it's 870,000. So there's a difference then there that we have to find throughout the rest of this matrix. Instead of the tech fee being at proposed tech fee change of $4 per credit, it's at $2 per credit. So that would also then cause more to find in this matrix. So what this scenario does is, instead of having a COVID stabilization reserve at 1.25 million, which was in the previous B, it's 1.45. So I found some of the difference from those anticipated revenue changes by adjusting that reserve amount. And then the other impacts spread out amongst contracted personnel, the whole personnel with OPE bucket. Instead of 1.36 million, it's 1.56. And then a greater reduction in materials and services, and then still funding major maintenance at 700,000. And then I repeated the same worksheet for scenario C, and this is a typo. It should say tuition. It's no longer banded, it's capped.
Mike?
Yeah, I would like to say that I appreciate Zach's effort to extend the positive impact of the COVID money by creating the COVID Stabilization Fund, which also seems to me to give us flexibility to go different directions should the situation require it. It gives us more flexibility. So I appreciate that work, Zach. The second thing is, I don't see how we get by next year without a tuition increase. I'm with the rest of you. I would love it if we could provide no tuition charge to our students. But under the current circumstances, I don't see how we get by without a tuition increase for next year.
Anyone else? Steve?
Zach, if we don't hit the 2% increase in student enrollment that those scenarios contemplate, could we use or could we dip into the COVID stabilization fund to meet that gap?
Yes. So my goal is to write the resolution that I bring to the board, mimicking the language that was in the ARPA, American Rescue Plan Act, section of the Higher Education Emergency Relief Funds, where it's allocating our eligible uses. And then obviously, since it's no longer grant funding, we can add in some flexibility to that. But the goal is, if we are establishing a COVID reserve, I would want to mimic to a degree the language in the grant agreement. But yes, we can do that, to answer your question.
And then the other is sort of a quick process question. You said that the second of the three scenarios you presented had been approved by the college council, and you didn't say that for the first and the third. I don't know enough. I'm new, right? I don't know. I haven't been through this process before. So if, let's just say, we prefer option 3, how does that work with regard to the college council?
So I would think we would, if I will let President Hamilton or Provost Paul handle that one.
Go ahead, Paul.
Thanks. Great question, Steve. So in essence, what's made its way through the governance structure is a balanced budget that did pin about 1.1 million from an increase in tuition revenue. I would say that's independent of the tuition model. We don't consider tuition models as part of budget development subcommittee. We had a placeholder for a dollar amount as a balancing budget there. I really believe that because of the uncertainty in predicting one versus the other in movement, they're all in the same general ballpark. I think that even scenario 3B meets the intended spirit of the proposal that's made its way through governance. I do think, however, though, on paper, to balance, as Zach has indicated, we did the best we could to estimate status quo revenue if nobody changes any kind of behaviors as to what we would get from those different models. And we would fall a little short with the banded model, and we would have to make that up with some other bucket of either revenue, increased revenue or decreased expenses somewhere.
They chose the option with the fewest staff cuts, to be expected.
Sure.
Right. So then if we chose an option or, that had, that balanced that out a little, differently with increased cuts to staff, not dramatically, but, the other options had some more. You're saying that we're free to do that under the process that we're currently running?
That's correct. Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
I believe the board approves the budget, correct? Yes. So I do have myself in the queue. Zach, I have a question. I wasn't clear on what the intent of the COVID reserve transfer or the COVID reserve fund would be for. Is it just like a piggy bank in case COVID comes back?
The purpose is, the strategy of it is that we're documenting that we're setting aside a reserve, documenting that we anticipate COVID to continue to impact our operations, setting aside money for it, and then using it when we need to. The flip side, I guess, would be alternatively, we could do nothing and use the fund balance to plug that hole, because that is the short answer to what we're doing. We're moving resources out of the general fund to establish the COVID reserve, and then we would be moving them back as we needed them.
So the money, this money isn't represented by the HERFA dollars, because my understanding was we hadn't spent all of our HERFA dollars and we were waiting to figure that out. So I'm just trying to understand whether or not we spent all of the HERFA dollars, and if the COVID reserve money constitutes HERFA dollars.
So we have not spent all of the money to date. We will spend all of the money. And as we draw down with our lost revenue calculations, the general fund ending fund balance will grow. Then what I would recommend is creating the stabilization reserve and moving some of that money out. So then in our legal public documents, we have documentation of creating the reserve and the intended purpose of why we're using it. Now, ultimately, the board has the authority to change the parameters that are set on the reserve, as well as authorize the college to liquidate it. But yes, we will draw down the remaining PERFA dollars, and then the goal would be to establish a reserve.
Rosie?
I have a question also I want to understand better. I'm looking at page 8 of your presentation. And my question is about administrative transfer. So is it correct that what that says is the goal in that scenario would be to achieve an administrative transfer of $5.7 million? Do I understand that correctly? That's what I want to understand, what that item represents. It's talking about international and KLCC administrative recovery.
Oh, yes, thank you. What that is that's a category of all of the other revenue. So instead of calling out tuition or fees or state funding, it is our category of other revenue. So a lot of our other resources that come into the general fund and Fund 9. What we're saying is we would implement a $410,000 change to bring that up from estimated 5.3 million to a estimated 5.7 million. And what's driving that change is we have an ongoing discussion with an external partner to expand their rental footprint on main campus. So once that agreement is finalized, there'll be $50,000 estimated additional revenue there. Returning to the practice of charging administrative recovery to the international program. Historically, we had done that. This year, we paused,
Right.
given their, accounting change. So it's reinstating that practice at 200, I believe, $260,000. They had been well north of 600,000. So it's a step back to where we were. And the other one is putting $100,000 administrative recovery on KLCC.
So the reason I was asking, I went back to your page 1 year-over-year comparison to see what our history of administrative recovery amount has been. And so what you're telling me now is that those numbers, for example, in FY21 don't reflect what we have historically been able to achieve in administrative transfer, because the numbers really different.
Yeah, they are. So what I did in the back end to save space is I added the administrative recovery, gifts and donations, other revenue, and sales of goods and services together. So I grouped all of those as other revenue. So the 5.3 million that's on page 1 for that sum of that category.
So it's really a different number from the one that appears in that year-over-year comparison, for example, in FY21. It's a different combination of monies in FY21 that you're accounting for in that line. Is that a fair?
I am creating a higher level group in the sheets that have the scenario sheets.
Well, because you can see my question was in 21, we didn't even collect $2 million in administrative recovery according to that line, but we're projecting we're going to collect over 5 million in this scenario. And I just want to understand why the numbers are so very different. And
Yep.
so I think you've answered my question.
So it's miscommunication. So this this number here is the sum of these 4 categories. I then move that to be this number here.
now I feel better.
Yeah,
about that.
so
I'm like
I'm only
7
saying,
times
so
better.
yeah. So then it's just the net increase, oh, I'm pointing with my finger, is just
Right.
this numbers for those categories. So no, I would absolutely not say we would increase the international one by 5 million. I would not, I would not do that.
So I'm not seeing any other hands if that hand is going down, Rosie. And Rosie, yep, okay, great. So thank you very much. And I'm sure we'll continue to have lots of great conversations about this. I am going to go ahead and move us on. Our next discussion item is the student activity fee, and AVP of Student Affairs, Mindy Dew, is going to discuss that with us.
Thank you, Chair Fragala. And good evening. Thank you for having me tonight. I know we have some newer members on the board, so if it's okay with you, I'll just walk you through our board policy and then the activities that we engage in and take any questions. Do I have the ability to share my screen? I think that I do.
Okay, who's got control of her being able to share her screen?
I think I can do it. Hang on a second here. Okay, so we work through board policy 715, and that's the mandatory student activity fee. And this is an assessment of mandatory fees and programs that it determines provides educational value to the students consistent with the college mission and goals. So I'm not going to read that to you. It's all important, but I would like to highlight that the programs that use these funds generated through the fee must follow the 3 guiding principles. And that's to improve the overall quality of the campus experience, increase opportunities for student involvement and leadership through extracurricular activities and support services, enhance the appropriate out-of-class services and programs. And so from there, and we also must follow some guidelines, like establishing the committee by October 30th, which we do each year. From that policy, we do follow a procedure, and that's in the COPS policy. And here we have the guiding principles, and we do talk about board policy 715 here. So here are the 3 goals. And we also, this is where we outline who is on the committee, who the members are of it, and what the voting looks like. And it always talks about how the students make the recommendation to President Hamilton via me, and then I forward that to and she forwards that to the board for a vote. Mr. Eister, I'd be happy to pause here for a question.
Yeah, I saw that the proposed increase was 50 cents. If you noted what the current overall charge is, I didn't catch that. Could you remind us what that is?
I have not done that yet.
Okay.
But I'm about to. Let me pull up my other recommendation here. So I wanted to give you a side-by-side comparison from last year to what they are recommending this year. Last year's total fee per student per term, and these are credit-bearing students. So students who are non-credit classes do not pay the fee. They don't access the same types of services, but they also do not pay the fee. So last year it was $63.07, and this year it'll be, if the board approves, it'll be $63.57. All of the groups were asked if they needed increases, and they all said, you know, this has been a tough year. Next year we may ask for something, but this year they did not wish to do so. And with that, I'd be happy to pause for any questions.
Anybody have a question?
Move approval.
I see Steve got his hand up right before that. Can we go to the question first and then to the motion, Rosie?
I don't think
Me?
wait a minute, am I confused? We're not taking any votes tonight, are we?
We're not? Oh,
Okay, well, anyways, right, I mean, this is just a work session, is that correct?
correct.
Yeah,
Okay.
very good point.
Okay, anyways, thank you, Mindy. A couple of questions for you. You're right, I'm new. I don't understand the process very well just yet. So that that total fee per student per term, is that prorated in any way for students who take fewer than whatever it is, 12 credits?
No, sir, it's not.
Wow.
Because
Ouch, I have
because
to
each
say,
yes,
by the way.
because each student is able to access all of the services.
The
that
full,
are
yeah, the
provided
full,
through
I
that.
get what you're saying. So they can access the full suite of things, even if they're just taking 1 or 2 credits. So they should have to pay the full freight. So you said, the other question, just that you said that, you all reached out to the student clubs and do you need an increase? And they said, given the difficulties this year, they declined, except for one, right? The Osberg.
Osprey. Mhm.
So, right, I'm correct there. So they all declined except for one. One's requesting a 50 cent or 20% increase.
Yes, that's correct.
And it's ultimately the board's prerogative to accept or deny?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
So I did want clarification on what Steve just asked. So thank you for that. This is a recommendation and it's the board's prerogative to approve. I'm curious because I have heard from some of the students involved in these groups that they spent very little money in the last 2 years. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
So over the last 2 years, all of these groups have been experiencing savings.
Actually, no, that is not correct. It is not correct to say that. So athletics has been in full swing, and several of these groups actually pay for personnel out of their funding. The Longhouse pays for the maintenance, upkeep, and paying for the Longhouse, which was voted on quite some time ago. So most of these groups, like the Torch, has production money that it needs to spend, but some of them have saved some money.
Great. And then I thought that initially in our packet, the increase was 0, and then it seemed like it changed. And so I'm just curious, did that change come through the student groups rather quickly?
It was a misprint.
Okay, all right.
It was a correction to the misprint. Oh, you were so fast.
That is completely fine. And I just wanted to make sure that that increase went through the appropriate process that the students are supposed to take. So thank you.
If that helps you.
Yeah, you're good. Angela.
Thank you. Does Osberg have staff that is funded out of the student activity fee?
No, they do not.
Do we have the budgets from these groups? I mean, I don't know how far we're expected or sort of permitted to dig. I guess I'm curious if Osberg in particular experienced savings and is now requesting an increase.
Thank you so much for your question. Osberg is not an on-campus student group. They are an external group, along with the Oregon Student Association.
Steve?
So, Mindy, I guess I'm a little confused. Sorry, my question is, are you forwarding this to us? Is this your recommendation? Does this recommendation include that you, through whatever investigations you've conducted, believe it is appropriate to increase Osberg's budget by 20%?
Are you asking me a personal opinion, sir?
Well, yeah. I mean, my understanding of the process is that you worked with those groups, and it's your job to forward a recommendation to President Hamilton, and then she brings it to the board. So I'm assuming that means that you're supporting the Osberg request, but I'm just wanting to clarify that.
Thank you for your question. I wanted to show you, I support what the students have decided that they want. And so in the interest of that transparency, this is what came to me. I actually don't serve on that committee. They do have Carl Ye, who's our interim dean of student engagement, as their guide. And so the membership has 10 voting members. They do have a non-voting chair, who's also our SGA president. They have 2 students who were on there last year. That would be Fatima and Laura. And the vote was unanimous. So I would say that they do support the work of Osprey. And so I support the students' decisions.
All right, well, thank you. I'll just put it out there for myself. Without some additional information, I would not be able to support that request for additional funds without some additional documentation.
Any other questions or comments? Thank you very much, Mindy. All right. Who is doing the policy stuff tonight? Is that you, Brett?
That's me. Blast from the
Okay.
past with board policies. Let's see here. I'm going to do my best to fill in for Michael Blade, but my legal background ends with episodes of Law and Order and LA Law. All right, we have 5 policies to bring to you this evening that you'll also see in a few weeks on your board agenda. The first 2 are real simple policies. They're basic, they're recommended as good practice. There are OCCA policies for both. Legal counsel recommends adopting both. The first one is Board Policy 3300. It's public records. The president, and I don't know if you really need me to read these for you word for word, but this
Nope,
one is.
we don't.
Okay, thank you, Chair. And the other one is Board Policy 3310, a records retention and destruction policy. So these would be new. There is no existing policy that these would replace. Recommended, not required, but legal counsel recommends both.
Mike?
I would support adoption of the policies.
Okay, support for those 2. And just as a reminder, the board will we will be moving these to the consent agenda if there is support and or no objection. So anybody else have any comments or questions regarding BP 3300 or BP 3310? Steve?
Well, just in the interest of giving staff some feedback and support, I mean, it seemed very reasonable to me, right? That my understanding of this process is they're trying to gauge how to bring these things forward for a vote when it comes
Correct.
time in a couple of months. So I think my sense is it helps to get some feedback. Where do we stand on these things? Sounds good to me.
Great, thank you. Anyone else? Okay, seeing some thumbs as well. Great. So I think we will be moving these to the April board meeting consent agenda. And remember, you always have the opportunity to pull it at that time as well. Okay, let's go on to BP 3410.
All right, BP 3410. This policy is legally required. There is an OCCA policy as well as an existing LCC policy. The existing LCC policy is Board Policy 550. It pertains more towards hiring. The OCCA policy 3410, it goes a little bit further, has more protected classes than the existing lane policies. And so legal counsel's recommendation would be to either have both policies combined as one or to adopt this new one, keep the existing one. It has been a practice in the past or at least the board's desire to include as many protected classes as possible. I know I remember this came up a few years ago, and the board decided to go a little bit further than the existing Oregon law and federal law at the time. guess I can stop there and take questions.
Did you want to show 3410?
Sorry, there we go. Yep. Not used
Okay.
to doing both jobs.
Thank you. Angela?
Thank you. I have a couple of questions which I asked in advance. And so I think that answers maybe came only to me of board members. So I'll go ahead and sort of share that if that's all right, and maybe then ask any sort of follow-up questions. So I asked, suppose we revoke BP 550 and approve BP 3410. Since the language in 3410 specifies that folks can have their complaints heard in accordance with state and federal laws regarding non-discrimination, what recourse, if any, do folks have for complaints about the bolded items in 3410, which are not protected by state law? And so my question, of course, is do we need to include language specific to those cases in order for there to be recourse available? Michael Blade replied with references to COPS policies, so administrative policies, I believe, that cover some of these areas. And so I think that's the response on that item. I have some concerns about not having language specific to that in our policy, saying that we protect classes, but then not actually offering recourse in our policy feels a little bit disingenuous to me. I also noted, obviously I made a crosswalk because that's who I am, between the list in BP 550 and the list in BP 3410. And 3410 is missing a few things from BP 550. So I would encourage us to add all of the items from 550 to 3410 if we were going to replace it. So I'll stop there. Questions and comments.
Anybody else have a question or a comment or a thought on BP 550 or BP 3410?
Can I just add
Go ahead, Brett.
Okay, thanks. The reason Michael directed you towards COPS for the various complaint procedures that we have in place is because that's where a lot of those administrative procedural policies and procedures are kept. And if the board did adopt this policy, you do direct the president right here to make sure that there are established procedures for complaints to be filed for all of these classes. So that would just direct the president to make sure that the COPS policies and procedures are updated.
So I'm hearing you say that there are policies in place at LCC to allow students who have complaints to have recourse.
Correct, and I think we might actually link to it on every web page on our website. I think there's a link to how students can file a complaint.
Okay, and I guess the one thing I would like to say is that I would hope that we capture all of the groups that are recognized in both policies and whatever final policy we end up with. I mean, I do notice that legal counsel did suggest we could do some combining of policies here. So, Angela.
Thank you. I might just be splitting hairs here. When I read the president shall establish administrative procedures that ensure all members of the college community can present complaints regarding alleged violations of this policy and have their complaints heard in accordance with state and federal laws regarding non-discrimination. I see the part where you can present complaints regarding alleged violations of the policy, and therefore that includes all of the protected classes that we list. But I don't, since it says have their complaints heard in accordance with state and federal laws, I don't see where the have your complaints heard if you have an alleged violation of a non-protected, non-legally protected class. I guess I just don't see where that falls. And I think maybe I'm splitting hairs, but it feels like there's something missing there to me.
Okay,
Well, what I'm hearing is I think we can ask Michael Blade to do a little work on that sentence and maybe work with you before the next meeting. It would be helpful to have some feedback on whether the board would like to combine both policies into one or maintain them as separate policies.
okay, so I am hearing that there is some interest to do some work on this, and I think we might need to check in. I can check in with Michael Blade about it. And I see hands going up. Marge and then Shane, or Shane and then Marge. Who wants to go first?
I will, to introduce Shane.
Great.
We spent a lot of time on this over the past couple of years, quite frankly, and Shane's can articulate this best. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Shane.
Yeah, thanks. So the way that we interpret that or operationalize the language from that policy is that it's not mutually exclusive. So all our procedures are compliant with state and federal law in terms of the rights that we have to provide, but our processes basically provide that for all of the protected classes that are covered under college policy. So even if it's not specifically called out in state or federal law, we're providing that same process and same level of threshold and protection to all of the classes that we list, if that makes sense.
Angela?
I think, thank you, Shane, for that explanation. I think that makes sense. I guess from my perspective, I don't necessarily want to leave it to, I guess, chance from what the board directs from a policy standpoint. And to me, it feels like if we don't specify that, then we leave it in hopes that administration will administer it the way we want it administered. But if we haven't actually said how we want it administered, we can't guarantee that that's going to happen. And I just think that that's our responsibility to be clear about.
So I think I have a sense of what the concerns are about this policy, and I do think we can do a little bit of tweaking, very likely with the support of Shane as well as Michael Blade. And so I'm going to say we'll do a little more work on this. Yeah, okay. And is there anybody that objects to moving on to board policy 3440? Okay, let's move to 3440, service assistance animals.
All right, this next policy is a legally required policy. We do not have a current existing LCC policy. OCCA board policy 3440 is presented and recommended adoption by legal counsel.
Any questions, comments about this one? Okay, seeing none. Any objection to moving it to the consent agenda?
Sounds good to me.
Awesome. Thanks, Steve. All right. And board policy 3500.
All right, our last one for this evening is OCCA board policy 3500. There is an existing LCC policy, board policy 405, that deals with health, safety, and workplace environment. The main difference between the two policies is that the existing LCC policy, as you'll see here, has a bulleted list of what the board would like the president to ensure is included in a campus safety plan. Whereas the board policy 3500 from OCCA merely directs the president to establish a campus safety plan and ensure that it's posted. So legal counsel's recommendation is adopting this new board policy, but if the board prefers to include the bulleted list from the existing LCC policy.
Okay. So legal counsel is recommending board policy 3500. Are there any comments or questions or direction? Austin?
Just really quick, in regards to those bulleted points, Marge, so you kind of use those bullet points though to create like a plan, correct? If we were to adopt this policy?
Whatever the board's pleasure is, yes. I mean, obviously, if there is a bullet that specifically said you will have a plan X, if there's not one, we're going to do it anyway. Though, I mean, that's so it's just that think of it as, the accountability reports that we kind of do it. I do a check the box on accountability reports. The bullet makes it very specific. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, personally, I don't see any harm in keeping the bullet points and thus keeping that policy, but with the addition of this new OCCA policy, but yeah, so I'm willing to go either way.
Eve?
Well, I prefer the OCCA. I don't have any reason to, doubt that Marge or her successor, Dr. Bulger, would not produce a safety plan that's comprehensive. And so I think when it makes sense to keep policies more general and flexible, that's the better thing to do. There are times when you need to be very specific. I guess I don't feel like this is one of them. The other issue of when you get too specific, then you cause people to think only in terms of your bullets and not broadly. Whereas if you leave it broad, then it forces them to think more thoroughly. So I just think that's the better approach.
Angela?
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly with your last sentiment, Steve. I'm concerned that by providing bullet points, we might restrict the list rather than leave it to be as broad as possible. So I understand that it might sound kind of silly for me in one breath to argue for more specificity in one policy and less specificity in another policy, but that is my position. Thank you.
And I would say I'd also echo the broader policy in some ways, actually, I think requires a greater investigation and practice of procedures. So I would go for the broader approach as well without the bullets, and I'm wondering if there's any objection to moving board policy 3500 forward without the bullets. Austin's okay with that. Okay, great. So we'll move that to the consent agenda. And so good job, Brett.
Thank you all.
We have 1, 2, 3, 4 go into the consent agenda, and then a little more work on 3410, 550. So great. Thank you, everybody. Let's go ahead and that's our discussion items for this evening. Let's check in real quickly on our future meeting dates. You are going to see our next board meeting is April 6th, and then our work session is April 20th. A whole lot of meetings in May. And the thing that I did want to let you know, which is I think also exciting, is that we are planning to begin meeting in person in April. And I think that I really enjoyed the opportunity to see everybody in our interviews and look forward to begin meeting again in person. Not going to promise that it's going to be April 6th, but that is the goal. And we'll see how quickly we can get things in place to make that happen. Is there anything else for the good of the order? Okay, so remember, we are meeting in executive session following this work session, and Donna will be sending us a link for that. Donna, did you have any other information for us regarding that?
No, I just sent the link, so that should be at the top of your inbox in your email.
Awesome, thank you. Angela? Nope. Okay, great. So I will close this work session of the LCC Board of Education. Good evening, everyone. Thank you. And we'll see people in the executive